Thank you once again for joining us at Techstylers Tech Deep Dive Cohort 5 2024. If you're just joining us for the first time, we are grateful to you. This is a training platform spearheaded by Techstylers, a community that empowers women to build a career in technology, and this is the security pathway. Thank you for joining us again. And if you are, if this is your first class, do well to go to YouTube and catch up on week 1 and week 2. We're looking at Microsoft Information Protection and Compliance Administrator functions. And while information protection and compliance is a requirement across different organization type and different data sets, Microsoft has its own solution that it uses to enable you stay in compliance with whatever regulation that you need to and ensure that your data is protected. So we're studying about Microsoft Purview and its features. We've looked at information protection, and then today we're looking at how to implement data loss prevention. Interchangeably, we're hearing words like information, data. I feel that they're all one and the same, because your data contains information and your information creates data. So for me, it's one and the same, depends on in which context it's being used. So we'll be looking at implement data loss prevention, a quick rundown of what today's under this category. How do you prevent data loss with Microsoft Purview? How do you implement endpoint data loss prevention? How do you now configure the DLP policies for Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps and Power Platform? How do you manage DLP policies and reports in Purview? One of the ways to position yourself, right, to be accessible in the event where you want to work for somebody is to be able to become a subject matter expert in a particular area. And that's what narrowing your data security capability and skills with Microsoft Purview would do for you. And that's why we have understood the context of data and how to classify sensitive information types and how to look at the different sensitive information types using keywords, exact data match, document fingerprinting. We would be looking at extending that knowledge to how Microsoft Purview would help you now prevent the data loss, how your endpoints, your laptops, your devices, how they would integrate with Purview to provide this extended protection, and how Microsoft uses your DLP policy for cloud application management around places like third-party applications and Power Platform, and then the policy and reporting. So basically, this is what we'll be spending our time today. All right. When you talk about data loss prevention, there are two key things you want to put at the front of your mind. Where to protect the content. Remember, in the previous class, we've understood the type of content. We've known our data. We've classified our data. We want to protect our data. So in order for us to protect our data, we need to know, where is this data? Where does it reside? Where am I keeping this data? Right? You don't protect what you don't know where it's kept. Don't enter mommy and daddy's room, you say to your kids, is because in mommy and daddy's room are sensitive informations, right? Don't don't take this ATM card, is because in your ATM card is your money, which is a sensitive information, right? So you need to know where you keep content for you to be able to protect that content. And so in Microsoft environments, contents are kept in places like Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive, Teams Chat, Teams channels, even your devices, right? Your Windows 10 devices, your virtual desktops. These are all different locations where you keep data. Your Power BI workspace, your applications. These are different locations where you keep data. So your mind should begin to explore. In my poll, I put something again around this so that we could interact. But your mind should begin to take you to where do I have data, because that's how I am going to be able to identify how to protect this data. And then you want to say, when and how can I protect the contents? So I have identify the possible places where my data resides, and I want to know when and how to protect it. And for me to know when and how to protect it, it would mean that I need to have rules that would have conditions and actions. So if I say, when do I want to protect it, it means I need to have a rule that will say maybe nobody should go into nobody should go. One perfect example: growing up, curfew, my parents would say nobody should come home after 6 p.m. And what my dad would do would be to lock the door from inside the house. So that way, if you are outside after 6, you would have to knock, and he would now know that you broke the rule. So our house was the location that was protected from whoever was outside after 6 p.m. And so the rules that we created was, do not come home after 6 p.m. Do not come home after 6 p.m. was the rule. And if you came home, the condition would be that you will have to knock on the door for somebody to open the door for you to access our house, which was the location where data was kept and protected. Data in this instance was the other family members who resided there. So in data protection, that's how you begin to think. You've identified you want to protect your data, but you need to know where, and then you need to say when and how do I want to protect them, so that you could identify the conditions and actions that will be in the rule that will enable you protect this data. Is that clear enough? Further explanation is in the video that I had that linked to the document. This will help you get more clarity and context. Yeah. Now, one of the ways using the Microsoft Purview that you can use to identify content to protect is in your Content Explorer. And in your Content Explorer, it can help you identify things to protect, which is your emails and your documents, right? That are sensitive. Now, in a corporate context, when we say data, we're referring to emails that you've generated, documents that you've generated. These are basically chats that you exchange. These are all the things that form into information and data. And so Content Explorer, one of the features, allows you to be able to see emails and documents that in your organization and that contain sensitive information types, while the Activity Explorer will only be telling you the kind of activity. So it will be saying Joy exchange this type of sensitive information with ABCD. So why it's saying staff records are in this SharePoint site, is activity will be saying Joy shared that site with Ayo. So Activity Explorer breaks down what happens in relation to that content that you have identified in the Content Explorer exists in XYZ location. Does that help? Please, if you have questions, raise your hand. I will see it and I would pause so that we don't go too far. Now, simple. We have known our data, identified and classified them, created even possible labels. Now we want to define the policies that help us to action the conditions that we want on those data. And what do? Simple. We go ahead to create a DLP policy in Microsoft Purview. Now, Microsoft has given us so many other templates that you can play around with. Templates help you get familiar with how the system works. And then as you master it, you begin to customize things, So with templates, you can see things that have been categorized into financial, medical and health, privacy, enhanced, and then custom. Microsoft has a very great way of enabling you to master things by giving you pre-populated templates that can allow you understand how to do. Now, in creating the policy, which we'll be doing some down the line today, you would have to, again, remember what we said, choose the location. So if I want to create a policy that restricts staffs in the HR department from sending out payroll people's sending out the payroll to anybody outside HR. Just give an example. Now, I need to ask myself, where is this kind of data existing? So it would be that the HR department probably have a SharePoint repository where they store this kind of documents. And what I have done is I have identified who I want to apply this to, which is HR department. I have said where's the location, SharePoint. Now I want to create a rule. So once I log in to create a rule, first thing I'll do is to choose the location where to apply the rule. So in that instance, I'll be choosing SharePoint. Now, because I know that beyond SharePoint, what if he or she wants to send it via email? I also want to protect it in email and then protect it in OneDrive, in Teams. I've just looked across what are the different landscape that these users interact with in HR, and I can select all those locations in this policy that I want to create. And then the policy would have the condition, right? The condition is going to say, what am I looking for? So I would say I'm looking for documents that match this label. Don't forget that your policy is the continuation of the classification and labeling that you have done in previous class, right? Now, who do I want to give exception? So maybe in the HR department, the exception is that the HR director or XYZ person are the ones who can do that. So because most times you need to send payroll to finance, right, to action, or some people in HR is the one that uploads it. But let's take in this use case that they need to send that payroll to finance. Now, it's not everybody in the HR department that needs to send it. However, because people are in HR departments or probably in the payroll team, they have access to payroll. But you want to ensure that even though you have access to this payroll, you don't have the ability to send it out because you're not authorized to. So the people who are authorized, we don't want to hamper operations. We put them into an exception box. So you also want to say, even though I'm going to action this ABCD, who are the people I want to exempt and I want to allow to be able to do this? Then the action is, what do I want this condition to do? So if I say a document that has this type of labeling, what is the action? Is the action to block, or is the action to automatically enforce an encryption? So there are ways you can say, we've labeled data, we're not putting encryption, but the moment somebody wants to send this data outside the organization, then now match it with XYZ encryption. So the action is where you break down what you want to be done at the trigger of that condition. Then you can notify both who received, both who sent of what happened. So you that is sending, it can notify you, of or why it took whatever action. And you that is receiving, depending on the context, it can notify you too of, okay, you have received this protected document or this sensitive document. This is the actions, or this is what we want you to know about what you want to do. In some instances where you are not doing enforcing, you can allow users override. So in context where you probably do force labeling, say any document created in the organization should automatically have a label, and it selects confidential. A user can come and say, okay, this thing is not confidential, even though it's matching, and then override it. There are certain policies you can create like that, but this setting is there. It's not applicable to all use cases. The reason why I'm taking my time to explain is that there's a part of work that you need to do as a information protection person that is called design and defining. Most times when people learn tech, they just want to implement. Give me and let me implement. Meanwhile, the actual work is in solutioning and architecting what you want. And until you understand the functions and the features and capabilities that are available, most times you just see yourself creating things that cause bottleneck. So the reason why these settings are being explained like this is when you have a use case and you will see that come out and play out very well in your project, you should take that use case and say to yourself, what do we want to achieve? Pull up a whiteboard, map out what you want to do. This is what we want to do. We want to protect XYZ. What are the things? This kind of users, when we protect, we still need to maybe give them an ability to be able to override because of their level of in the organization, and then we trust that they understand what they are doing. Or this level of people, we do not want them to be able to override, so we can't enable these settings. Once you have all of this mapped out, what that does for you is that you have slowly and stylishly developed a checklist or a step-by-step guide that makes your life very easy when you log into the portal and you now want to create. But what we find most people do is there's a need and there's a use case, they just jump straight into the portal and start to click. So when they begin to have issues, what they find and struggle to do is, where could the issue be? And the reason for sitting down and doing proper solution and architecting is that even in the event where you have issues, troubleshooting becomes easy because you can see at each step what you have done and then be able to trace down the issue is happening at this layer. So what could be the possible reasons? Now, this might not be 100% related to this course, but it's one of the things we've seen in the behavior of techie people. People just want to go ahead, action, without spending time and effort in planning, designing, defining what they need to do. And then lastly, when you've created all of this, your policy, you would have triggers, incident reports. So on the compliance dashboard, you see the incident reports, which are a function or of what your policy has triggered. It will come into the incident report. Why, after creating your policy, if you had the question from one of us around testing, you have the ability to be able to test your policy, to be able to see what it matches, and then see if you can customize the policy tips that notify the users of what this is about, and see if there's a need to put further exceptions in order for you not to be triggering lots of false positive. So this is one of the good features that you have with DLP, where before you publish a policy, you can play around with it and see what the expected result is, so that you are sure that when you are pushing this out, either organization wide or to designated users, you can have an idea of what the possible reaction would be. For those who are in the Power BI space, this is still in preview, but this is another thing that Microsoft has introduced. Because remember, when we say know your data, data is the gathering of so many informations. Now, the Power BI guys, in the course of doing their jobs, integrate with so many data sets, and they pull all of this information into a workspace that is now another location and repository for data. And so Microsoft is extending Purview to that capability. It's still in preview mode, but it's possible. So the likes of our classmates who are in the Power BI track, right? What this is showing for you is that for somebody who built a career path in Microsoft Teams, in Microsoft SharePoint, in Microsoft Workplace, in Microsoft Data Analytics, Power BI, security is relevant in each of this category. So as a data protection and information protection and data security expert, what you'll be doing is that you are now finding out that you are putting your hand and stretching your hand at different sectors to understand, how do these people use data, how do they generate data, how do they interact with data, for you to be able to protect and ensure that as the organization is extending its functionalities to these different workloads, you are infusing the right data security controls into this place. So for Power BI, it's been observed that lots of data is played around in that space, and now you can extend your sensitivity labels, your policy conditions into the Power BI space. And simply, how do you do it? Again, just by applying to that workspace, enabling it. If you remember where we talked about the locations where let me see if I can go back quickly, where we said that you need to turn on your policy, you will see, yes, here. So you can see here that we have Power BI in preview. So somewhere around there, it's become something that when you're creating the policy, you can turn on for Power BI workspace. So I can create a policy now for those who are in the Power BI space, who probably, so there's a project. In that project, they brought you as a security compliance person. The team is going to be working with different data to be able to create dashboards that help XYZ people, management or whatever, do stuff. Now, as a security person, they've come in to say, what are the controls you can put in there? One of the things you can extend is to say we can use Purview to be able to ensure that as they are working on this data workspace, XYZ information that they generate and are giving access to in this space do not do XYZ. So you see why planning needs to happen first. And then once you've planned to say, okay, what do we want? We don't want them to be able to copy and paste. When they see the dashboard allows them to be able to export. But the moment they export, we don't want them, that exported document should automatically have a label, a sensitive label on it, so that by the time it has a sensitive label, this action can happen. Now, what do? Once you have drawn that flow, you can come back here, create the DLP policy that points to that Power BI location workspace, and then it triggers your conditions and action. So this is one good feature that is available for the Power BI use cases. Again, we can extend DLP to on-prem repositories, right? Like file shares and SharePoint document libraries that are on-prem, using what we call the Azure Information Protection Scanner, right? And where you install it, it needs to meet certain prerequisites and have the AIP client that will enable you now do the connection by extending your labeling. Again, another piece of work on its own, but is it possible? Yes. So if you're in organizations that still rely heavily on-prem data storage, lots of file server, oh God, once upon a time it was a particular function that I gave people in my team, like to manage file server, because all manner of information about the organizations are in file server. So, but as people are moving to the cloud, right, organizations still have data that are retained in this file server, and Microsoft is not just rolling it out and saying because it's not cloud. So using the Azure Information Protection Scanner, you can extend your labeling into the on-prem repositories, doing some bit of configuration, design and build that happens there. We're not going detailed into that scope, but is it possible? Yes. And then you can leverage the Purview policies to control data protection in that ecosystem. Now, Purview also has some extensions that you can use exactly because of people who use third-party applications. So you have people who, no matter how wonderful Microsoft is, they will still prefer to use Chrome, and so you want to be able to push out some of these policies to Chrome, even though it's not the default Microsoft browser, which is Edge. Yes. Is it possible? Yes. You have those kind of questions in some environments, and Purview has extensions that you can use on Chrome browsers, right, that allow you to push in certain policies and configuration profiles, right? This is currently the extension management is currently being done with what we call Intune Endpoint Manager, Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Again, another use case and career path for people who are in the device management part. But is it possible? Yes. The reason why this is called that is just so that if you are driving a data protection program and you are beginning to see all these use cases, you don't just say, oh, the only thing we know how to manage is when it is in SharePoint. No, you have these additional places where you use, due to extensions and plugins, you can extend the data policies and controls into these platforms that you use to consume data, right? So whether Chrome still remains an unsupported browser in quote, like it says, in some organizations, Chrome is a no-no. But we've seen places where Chrome does a better job for certain custom applications, and so the organization has to deploy Chrome to its users. In that instance, if you're driving a DLP program, smile, because happy days, using extensions, you can still push out those DLP policies and it will apply. Okay, so DLP policy also for Teams. So the fact that people are using Teams to communicate, Teams as a location. So we've looked at DLP in different repositories, and we now broke it down to DLP in Power BI, DLP for on-prem location, DLP for third-party browsers like Chrome using the extensions. And now we're looking at that for Teams also. You can create custom DLP policies for Microsoft Teams that will ensure that, when people are chatting, right, certain information, so you can find out that, okay, the person is not sending the email, but when they download it, they are sending it to somebody through chat, right? We've had people, try to break the protection cycle of an organization because they just sent it via chat. So now you can extend DLP policies and enforce compliance to chats by creating a policy and specifying that if this thing is happening, if this document or this information is being shared via chat, action XYZ based on whatever your use case is. All right, any questions? Now we'll extend our DLP to endpoint. When we say endpoint, we're referring to your workstations, which is your laptop, your desktops, your mobile devices. And while we've been looking at documents, repositories, applications that we use to access documents, the endpoint itself is an entity and a repository on its own that keeps company data, right? So you open an email, you save the PDF, it's been classified, but you save it on your laptop, right? How do we ensure that as an endpoint we can protect and prevent the loss of data? And this will be leveraging some other functionalities that are not necessarily Purview, but this is just calling out that in the whole data lifecycle program, the endpoint is also an entity that stores data. So one of the first things you want to do is for you to be able to achieve this has nothing to do with Purview first, but as an endpoint, if you want to extend endpoint data loss prevention on endpoints, the first thing you need to do is extend monitoring and protection capabilities on that endpoint using the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, right? So that endpoint will have to be onboarded into Microsoft Defender, and then once it's onboarded into Microsoft Defender, you will have the ability to be able to extend, monitoring and protection capabilities to these endpoints. And it's not only Windows. So if you're an organization that is heavily marked, so for the people in creative industries, you can extend this to Mac devices. It doesn't have to be Windows. Yes, Ayo, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I just want to clarify: is Microsoft Windows Defender and Windows Defender for Endpoint, are they different? That's my question.
Windows Defender is, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's what we used to call the antivirus that you see on, like, if it's not an enterprise device. I'm trying to see if I can share. So the antivirus will be called Windows Defender.
Yes, it's called Windows Defender.
Yes. So, but in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, it is a component of it. So the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint is like a bucket that has the Windows Defender inside it, right? So the Windows Defender is the antivirus, while the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint is the security suite. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So for you to be able to extend endpoint DLP to devices, you need to onboard that device to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Now, the reason why all of this is a bit confusing for administrators, because for Microsoft Defender for endpoint, for your Windows Defender, for your endpoint DLP, what is allowing you to be able to enforce those policies is one sensor, right? Is a sensor. So back in the days when people were, it's antivirus, you will install an agent for antivirus. So in this instance, Windows Defender. However, now that Microsoft is not just focusing on antivirus, because we've seen that antivirus is not sufficient enough to provide you the endpoint security, just putting an antivirus on the system. So in order to provide a holistic approach to endpoint security, that's where the Microsoft Defender comes in. Exactly. Yes, thank you, Emmanuel. And so you'll be doing things like attack surface reduction. You'll be doing things like endpoint DLP that we're looking at now. You'll be doing things like Windows Defender, which is the antivirus. You'll be doing things like the device management. That's where Intune comes in. So all of these protections happen under the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, right? So for you to say, oh, I want to do endpoint DLP, because the sensor is tied into MDE, you need to onboard that device into Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Yes, Marian.
Okay, I was going to ask a question, but I think Emmanuel answered me kind of. So the question I was going to ask is, normally our Windows, a regular PC you have, it usually comes with Windows Defender. So when you were
Yes.
mentioning Microsoft Defender, I was going to ask if it was the same. But from what Emmanuel put on the chat, he's saying Microsoft Defender is like you have to more like buy it for an enterprise, and then Windows Defender is like a component. So I don't know. I think that already answered the question I was going to ask, because every system has Windows Defender. So I was thinking if they
Yes,
were the
so
same, they were
it's the same
different.
and not the same. Windows Defender is just the antivirus, which is a component of Microsoft Defender.
Okay, meaning if you want Microsoft Defender, you have to purchase for it. It doesn't come with a Windows system by default.
Microsoft Defender is a suite that has so many other things under it, and inside it
Okay.
is Windows Defender.
Okay. Thank you.
So when you buy your laptop, you just bought a laptop. It's not an enterprise laptop. What makes it an enterprise laptop is when you activate the operating system to either be Microsoft, Windows, Professional, or Enterprise. Are you aware of that?
Okay.
When you buy your laptop off the shelf, your laptop is not an enterprise laptop. That's why most organizations who do laptop, and permit me to digress a bit, who just do endpoint management shabbily, they go online and they see laptop 180,000, then somebody is telling them laptop 250,000, and their thinking is about the laptop. The person is saying the operating system, for us to be able to put the corporate security that you need here, you need Windows operating system, enterprise or professional. But the one that they're selling off the shelf has Windows, what do they call that, home edition or whatever edition. Because of that home edition, that's why that laptop is cheaper than the one that they are giving you that is enterprise or professional. And you see most people say, no, give us that one that is home edition. No problem. But when you come with home edition, certain security policies do not work. So what you see the IT people do is take an image and load it on that one. And most times, if that bare metal is not compatible for that thing, you begin to have some device issues along the line. But where I'm going to is that it's the operating system that determines the functionality. So when you buy your home laptop, you have default antivirus Microsoft has put, which is Windows Defender. But when you come to the corporate environment, you're looking at the endpoint as an entity, the laptop, as an endpoint. And in order to protect the laptop, you need a full endpoint protection suite, which is Microsoft Defender for Endpoint.
All right. Thank you very much.
So if we now wanted to do endpoint DLP, which is this endpoint, we want to ensure that data does not get lost. We're saying the first thing is, do you have Defender for Endpoint? Now, because you are doing Purview, by default, you will have Defender for Endpoint. Now, this is licensing on itself, and that's how Microsoft has put it, except you specifically went to buy Purview as a component on its own. But most people who have the E3, E5 automatically have the Defender for Endpoint. And that's licensing conversation for another day. Now, under the Defender for Endpoint, you would now have to onboard that device. And once you onboard that device, automatically, because you have onboarded that device, it automatically is onboarded into the endpoint DLP container. All you now need to do is push policies. So this is something new Microsoft has been bringing in. It's not new, but a lot of people don't know about it. They are still relying on, they just see, like you said, Windows Defender, and that's what they think. And that's just antivirus. Microsoft has extended this thing. If you look at the image Emmanuel has helped us put in the chat, all of those components are under the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So your next generation protection is your Windows Defender that you have at home. So they don't just call it the next generation protection. They don't just call it Windows Defender and corporate. It's next generation protection, which is your typical antivirus, because it's doing much more than just the antivirus of catch clean that most people know antivirus for. Now, there's still some limitation in the endpoint DLP because as Microsoft is trying to extend this capability, there are still some type of file extensions that may be able to bypass this. Just Microsoft is, for transparency's sake, that it doesn't now mean that it's 100%, but we've been able to see lots of organization use cases that is captured in this category when we want to do endpoint DLP. So how do you prepare for endpoint DLP? You need to ensure that the endpoint DLP is on the device, and then you now create the policies. What the endpoint DLP does for you is that's what helps you to protect the use of removable devices. So using USB, using Bluetooth, using RDP, connecting to VPN, using copy and paste. So are you seeing that everything that you would do at the endpoint, right? So you have opened up your personal email, you've gotten your USB, you've collected company data, or you've generated company data because it's public, but you have a USB. If the organization says it's okay for this thing to be classified public, but only when it's within the organization, the way somebody wants to put it on their USB, block, right? So that's it. So some of you are in organizations where if you put your USB in your company devices, you find out that you can't use USB. But when you take your USB home to your home laptop, you are using USB. It's not that anything is special. The organization is doing what we call endpoint DLP. They are protecting their data from being exposed or compromised via removable USB. So these are all the type of policies you can create when you're doing endpoint DLP. Restrict copying to cloud service platforms. So I open my Google Chat and I have this document, company document. I open my Google email, open the chat, and I want to copy from here and paste here, right? So I know that my brain knows that by default that if anything I send the email, IT they monitor them. But you think that because it's chat, you can copy and paste. We can use endpoint DLP as long as it's company device. Say somebody is copying from here and copying into any IRCS, so Internet Relay Communicator app, block. Right. So in these instances, it doesn't even necessarily have to be classified as anything. It can just be an endpoint protection policy that your organization puts in. As long as it's company laptop, nobody should be able to copy from the laptop into any chat system. So you open your email, your chat on your personal device, and you open your personal email on your personal device, and you find out that you can copy and paste. But when you come to your office device, you open up this same chat, you open up Skype, then you open up company data, you open up and you are trying to copy and paste and you can't, and you're wondering what's happening. That's at the endpoint level, they have restricted you from doing those kind of things. So those are ways companies keep data stock within company devices. Yes, Osaze?
So I'm just thinking in my head, like with all of this protection, what happens to people working from home? How do you protect those data from, someone can easily take a picture of their screen? How do you stop all that?
The truth is you can never, I don't know how many of you have heard that nobody is 100% protected, right? And it's because we know that technology has not yet come where we can take screen, but we're getting there because now there's a functionality in DLP that allows us to do use the OCR technology, where if you scan, then it's a scanned document, but it can see inside the scanned document the sensitivity. We're getting there. So maybe one day somebody will invent where the endpoint protection can see that you're using your phone to take a picture of a document, right? And then somehow with the phone NFCs and all of that, it can detect it. But currently today, even if you're in the office, sitting in your office, using your office internet, somebody can use their phone and take a picture. So security, that's why I tell people that security is not magic. It's just optimizing what we currently do. So in the organization today, if you're sitting in your desk in the office and nobody's looking at you, you can take your phone. It's just that you are aware that office camera is there, so you don't do it. So that person now is sitting at home and knows that they're in the comfort of their house, nobody's seeing them, and they can't copy out company data. They now use their phone and take a picture of it. Right now, there's no technology that can solve that problem of where, so it is now a culture thing, and that's why those kind of people, when they are found, you will see that they face disciplinary committees and they are sanctioned, because for you to have that kind of thought, you are evil. Sorry, you are evil with every sense of humility. Because if company says don't take out this information and you've gone to the extent of using your phone to copy it out, to what purpose? If you're using it to copy it out for malicious content, then you're evil. So at that point, if it gets found that that's how the data leaked, because remember, we have activity monitoring, we have different monitoring, and investigation has been done. One of the things I enjoyed in my career back home was doing lots of forensic investigations. We can tell you how information left. You will see people come up with all manner of tricks, and up until printer, we can tell you how information left an organization. So if after everything they find out that there's no other way, we always fall back to say it's possible the person has used their phone to take a picture of this. And at that point, management is upset and the sanction is grieved, because it's a deliberate act to create a gap and exposure of that company data. So there's no technology now that can help that. Does that help you out, Osad? But every other thing that we're looking at, even if the person is at home, working at home, using company device or using personal device, data loss prevention will have effect and prevent that loss. But with taking your phone and taking a picture, there's nothing we can do. For now, AI is coming, and maybe we will get there. So how do you do this? Again, this is a different pathway. There's a pathway called Microsoft Endpoint Security Pathway. So this is data pathway. The Microsoft Endpoint Security Pathway will take you deep dive into the endpoint security suite that Microsoft has. And so one of the things you will do there is that we onboard devices, using any of these methods. So I'm just doing a swift run. So in case I'm fast and somebody feels this, because this is not our focus. This is just saying that when you're looking at a DLP program for an organization, don't be too excited focusing on only documents. Ensure that you are also speaking in the design side. You're speaking to what about from an endpoint side? How are we ensuring that these data don't get compromised, right? So that's why it's infused in the training, just to bring you into that perspective when you're designing. So there's a whole lot, either local script, group policy, configuration manager, Intune, or script for VDI. What you will typically do will be to onboard that device, and once you've onboarded the device, whether it's even Mac OS, once you've onboarded the device, then you now push your DLP policies, which you can have global policies or specific, and the policies can be very specific to even file paths, right? It can be specific to application. It can say if the person is using Outlook, right? The moment the person wants to copy from Outlook to anything that is outside Outlook, block or limit. It can do restrictions from even domains, from browsers. It can enforce that, okay, put a business justification why you need to do this. Like in my corporate laptop now, I have access because I'm a solution architect to install, but at the point where I want to install, it's asking me for business justification why I need to install XYZ on my company laptop. Some other person doesn't have access to install, and if they need to install, they need to raise a ticket to provide that justification to service desks who elevate their right. For me, I have rights, but I must provide justification. So these are different ways you can enforce DLP at the endpoint. Let me see, do we have... I'm looking at the time, so I'm not going to go through the video. This is one of the video links I put for us in the outline. Take your time, it's about 30 minutes, and you will see how endpoint DLP is set up, configured, just so that you have an idea of how we now finally, once it's done, that the data classification and label that we've done can now be extended to the endpoint. But the first thing is that endpoint needs to be onboarded and managed for the DLP classification that we've done to be extended to it. I want to really cover. Now, another place that we extend data classification to is on cloud apps. So Microsoft Defender for Endpoint caused a bit of questions for us, right? We now have the Microsoft Defender for cloud apps. Microsoft Defender is Microsoft security suite that Microsoft has pushed out. There's a whole Microsoft Defender suite is over 20. There's a whole lot. Microsoft is doing so much on ensuring that we stay protected. And so While the Microsoft Defender for endpoint focuses on the endpoint, we have the Microsoft Defender for cloud apps that looks at applications. And so you can also extend your data classification, data labels, data protection policies to the cloud apps. So as an information protection person, remember, you've done your part. You've identified where data is. You've identified the types of data you've created, whether keywords, document fingerprinting, different classifications and labels. But you now want to create policies, and the policies, remember, need to apply to different places. So that's where you now begin to interface with your stakeholders. So this is where you identify your stakeholders. So you go to the guys who are responsible for endpoints, they're your stakeholders, and you sit down with them to say, we know that people can leak company data from their devices. So this is what we've done. How do we work together to create policies? You go to the apps people managing applications, security applications, and then you have this conversation too with them. So the Power Platform allows you to create policies and restrict communication between the different connectors that the people in the Power Platform will be using. That's one of the tracks that is ongoing. We have the Power Apps track today, and in the project, when you join the project session, you will see that the first thing on the project is the people in the Power Apps who will be creating applications. And then the next following them is the Power BI people who will be extracting the type of data that apps is generating and analyzing it. And the third set of people in the project team is you, the security, who needs to ensure the security of this platform. So connectors are used to protect Power Platform. This is what the Power Platform guys use to pull data, pull connections from different data sources, and we can use DLP policies to restrict what these connectors do and who they talk to and how they will communicate. You create file policies in the Defender that will now use your data classification. So like what I've been saying, that we can extend the data classification policies that we've created that can now help us to check files, because sometimes the Power Platform people will create, the application can be like a file repository. The application can be where if you feel ABCD, I'm struggling. And I'm struggling not to give away the project answers because the project is in my head and I want to give examples. The examples coming to my head are the project, and my mind is saying you're just going to be giving this expo. So sorry, that's why if you've noticed, I'm doing lots of I'm trying to be very cautious not to use the projects as my example so that I don't give away the answers. Sorry guys. I just realized that I've done a lot of and I'm like, these people will understand what I'm dealing with here. Okay, so you would have apps that will require people to upload files, upload certain documents, and those are sensitive documents. It could be sensitive before it got into the app. It could be sensitive the moment it's gotten into the app and needs to be used, and somebody else needs to download it or access it. What we're saying is that with Purview now, because of the classification you've done, you can file monitor this, create policies that are very granular, and can say that when they're using these particular apps, this classification that you've done, this protection should adhere in it. And it goes as far as when you're using third-party, applications like Dropbox, Salesforce, right? There's some open APIs that we can use, and also some of these applications already have there's a word for it. They already have a relationship with Microsoft, so these apps can be managed just like the way somebody suggested to me. I think it was Emmanuel, the Silo app here. If I go to Teams, I should be able to pull it in. So some of these apps already have partnership with Microsoft where you can pull in and activate using the license you have, and then it automatically allows you to manage it. So that's where the Microsoft Cloud Apps allows us, where are there apps that are not Microsoft apps that your organization is using. When you pull them into the Microsoft Cloud Apps, what it does is that you create a group for them and call them sanctioned apps and unsanctioned apps. So where this helps is, for instance, some organizations, because of the kind of job they do, they can classify social media apps as unsanctioned apps. So the moment you're doing anything social media on the corporate laptop, it will not allow you, or it would protect it with certain kind of protection policies. So you have people open their Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook on their company laptops, and you just find out that there are certain things you can't do. Or you see people say, oh, they're monitoring what you're doing. I'm like, why are you opening it on company laptop? Is it your laptop? So at that instance, it is Microsoft Cloud Apps that allow the organization to put those kind of restrictions where you can't just you can't find yourself easily copy from so you open a Word document, maybe it's not even company information. You open the work document, you open Google, you're researching something. Maybe you're using ChatGPT to research stuff. Open company Microsoft Word. And on the company laptop, you open up Facebook or open up Instagram. And as you're trying to copy, what happens? You can't. It's because we've extended DLP to Cloud Apps, and Cloud Apps has categorized each of those applications you are using, and certain policies have been extended to it. That's why some of those things happen. If any of you is experiencing that currently, that's why it's happening. So I tell people, I say, when you're on company laptops, try as much as possible not to do anything personal. It's not that they hate these companies. So what they're saying is they need to reduce their exposure, and social media, like we all know, is one of the ways where people expose company sensitive information. So Cloud Apps helps us to do those kind of extensions, even for third-party apps that are legit. So your organization is using Salesforce, your organization is using Dropbox, but then because these are not proprietary owned applications by Microsoft, but you are using them as licensed company applications, so it's storing company data. You can extend the data classifications into those platforms using Microsoft Cloud Apps. Again, for those who are in the Cloud Apps pathway, they understand how to use it. Your job will be to sit down with them to say, how do I extend this classification, sensitive information level into these locations? And then you can configure different policies, right, that will allow you to see these files, that when these files are used, who is integrating with these files, and the type of classification services. Another thing we can look at is violations, right? Who is violating this policy? So that's where their monitoring us is. So somebody is violating the policy, you can see it because it's corporate. You're managing the endpoint, you're managing the apps, and you can begin to see Joy tries to transfer XYZ company data to here. Joy is doing a bulk file upload to OneDrive. Why? My kind of job, all of a sudden there's a trigger that I'm using Dropbox and I'm uploading lots of files to there. Those are kind of things that will flag, because as the company person, why am I using, even though the company has allowed me to use Dropbox, why am I uploading large file contents into Dropbox? And those kind of things, it will trigger it as violations. So you can see those kind of violations that exist in the organization. Lastly, under DLP, we'll be looking at how to manage DLP policies and the reporting. So while you're doing all this thing, you want to also be able to take reports and show organizations, right? Remember, your DLP policy program is not a big bang, it's a journey. It's a continuous journey, because it's like the lifestyle and culture of people, right? It's like weight loss. You don't just wake up one day, sleep and say, I want to lose 20 kg, and then when you sleep and wake up, you lose 20 kg. It starts from, so even when people use drastic measures to lose weight, if you watch, they go back to building a routine, because for them to sustain that drastic weight loss, they need to have a routine that they stick to. And in events where they don't stick to that routine, they tend to fall back to the old way. I'm a typical example of that. So I lost over 20 something kg, but then I got pregnant. And of course, when you're pregnant, you don't eat right, you do everything that you're not supposed to do, and so I've added back weight. So for me to lose it again, I have to repeat. So that's how data loss prevention programs are. You don't just go into it and say done, project close. Is a journey. So you phase your journey, and while you're phasing your journey, you need to be able to communicate back on what you are seeing, on the behavior, on the report. Is there anything you need to fine tune? Is there anything that is conflicting, or is there anything that is overlapping? And so you can create reports that show or give you insights, and then that way you can know, oh, this policy and this policy are conflicting, that means this one needs to take precedence. And those are the essence for the test mode that we use, right? The test mode will help you to evaluate the impact of a policy. It will help you to tell you what the performance before activating it, and you're able to see incident reports for analysis. Again, you can start by creating your policy. How do you want to notify? Test it, show the policy tips, and adjust using Activity Explorer and sensitivity to gather information. So the good thing with reporting is that it gives you insight into what you're doing, and you can say, oh, we pushed this policy to HR, this was the behavior, this is the feedback, now we want to push it to finance, or we've pushed it to HR and finance, and this is the difference that we see, so now we want to push it to maybe legal team. This is what we need to pay attention to, because this is the kind of behavior that we see here with this type of users and business use case. Again, key dashboards that give you reporting. You have the Activity Explorer. Again, reminder, it will show you the events, show you how your sensitive information is being used, show you labels that were changed, files that were modified, rules that matched each label. The DLP reports would help you to where you can use PowerShells to export reports, and then the advanced classification scanning can help you see where your rules are matching. And then the Defender for Cloud Apps has its own dashboard where you can see the location, the type of policy, the type of application that the user is using, and the user that is actually dealing with all of this. Reporting too can be managed so that somebody is not suppressing. So you can have role-based access control done on your reports. There are people who can just have viewer rights. There are people who can modify these reports, and there are people who can just create the report, see it, but they can't do anything with it. They can't expand. Then you have people who can create the reports, view it, export it, share it. It's very important that you also have role-based access control when it comes to DLP reports. The DLP policies are not what you use to handle violations. So you use exceptions. You need to say, okay, I'm having lots of false positives. Then what exceptions do I need to, exclusions rather, do I need to put in place to allow this behavior not happen? So once you have known your data, apply the policy, pushed it out, classified label, push the policy. Now you're looking at the dashboards and fine-tuning. You want to see how to now respond to the policy violations. And policy violations is, oh, are there people that are adhering to this thing? Are they adhering to it well? Good. People are adhering to it, but the thing is frustrating them, because what we're seeing is that they are probably having to reclassify all the time because the thing is matching so false positive. Or are there people who are adhering to this, but we are still seeing some data loss because we don't have probably some strict policies that are matching this category? All of these things you would manage and respond using the DLP reporting. Okay, so that's all under implement data loss prevention. So a quick question and answer. What's the answer to number 1? So who wants to go off mic and explain to the class why it's 1? I'm not going to, it's knowledge check. I need to know if people are listening. I'm just talking. All right, Miriam, explain to us why the answer is 1.
Okay, I feel like it's 1 because from the question they said that match a single DLP policy rule. So it's just 1 that it has. So the rule that was created was if it has maybe a unique 16 unique credit card numbers and then other rules, but then it matches 1. So it's just 1 that would display.
Does anybody have a counter answer?
I was also thinking maybe how many lines would display on the DLP, because it's a high value listing. I was also thinking it would be 5 because the credit card is a high value listing. Once the credit card number gets out, it's a high value DLP.
So Samuel, what's the word? The context of high is not by number. Sure, you know.
Oh, okay.
So your logic is correct, but where you missed it is that you now feel that because it's high, it needs to carry 5. So it's 1 policy, very specific credit card. So the credit card is matching it, but it's matching 1 policy, so it will show 1.
All right. Thanks
Yeah,
for the
I understand your explanation, but it's not, you don't say because it's high, then it will show 5 times, because that's how your response is sounding. All right, who is going for number 2?
Number 2, is it maintaining?
Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. Just say it.
Test the policy before releasing.
Who else wants to go? I'm not saying you're wrong, neither am I saying you're right. Who else wants to go? Except everybody says you're right.
I will go with the first option. Reason because
Now hold on, Ayo, hold on. So Samuel, why did you choose your own? I just wanted to be sure if we have a different answer, then I'll ask for explanation. So Samuel, why do you think it is test the policy before releasing it?
Okay, so we have to test the policy before releasing it because we have to know if that policy actually matches our health facility in order to, let's say, purge it of any when, let's say, there is some that we don't need, then we purge it, then we create a custom one.
Ayo, do you want to go?
the only challenge I'm having is I don't know if this is meant to be a checkbox for multiple answers or just a radio button for one answer. But if we are going with single answer, I will first go with the first one. Reason is because we are trying to apply this policy in the healthcare, and we're also using the US personal information policy. So there's already the act already that has been set for healthcare in the US, which is what every healthcare service must follow. So the first way I'll go about it is that we should first create a custom policy to identify the information that is already aligned with that policy, so that it helps us guide as we go forward. But now, because it's saying we should maintain as a top priority, so we have to ensure that we still follow that guideline of the act. So that's why I still come with the first one. But if we are going to customize it, this is just, I know it's knowledge check, but I'm just thinking beyond the question. If we are going to go beyond it to tailor it down to our own, let's say, hospital, after applying the HIPPA, then we can now start making some changes. That is where that customizing comes in. That's my own take.
It almost sounded like you are taking 3-1 first, but in your explanation it sounded like 3-1, but your answer is only like 1 first.
Yeah, 1.
Okay. Who else wants to go?
Right, I'll go first. Can you hear me?
Okay, Madam Franca, hold on. Somebody else, like when you finish, then Madam Franca goes. Who is speaking next?
Right, my name is Tayo. I will go with the first option first, which is create a custom policy to identify HIPAA protected information. And I think what that means is before we can even protect anything, we need to know what exactly are the information that should be protected. And I think that's what the first option is saying. We need to know exactly what information should be protected based on that policy. So what are the information? How critical are they? Then we can once we identify that, we can now create a custom policy to do that. I think that's what it means. So I'll go with the first one.
Madam Franca, you?
Okay, I'll go for 2. It says turn on the policy right away, because it says that the best practice should be to employ using the ready-to-use US personal information policy templates. That's why I'll go for 2. Yeah.
Okay. Does any other person else want to try? Miriam, I will answer you. Does any other person want to try? Osaz, yes?
So I'm just trying to clarify that the line that says ready to use, does that mean you have to test it to make sure it functions according to what the policy says?
It's interpretation. So that's why I'm asking people to explain their answer. However you interpret it, then you explain to us why you interpreted it like that. Remember, these are hands-on solutions. So it's not a case of, this particular question is not a case of click and it will scatter. This is pure design session. So that's why we're asking the question, so we can understand, do you even understand the context? And I'm enjoying the different perspectives that we've put. We're all saying the same thing. It's just in interpreting what this use case is. So however you understood that line, what do you think should be your action? Okay, Osaze doesn't want to. He wants to step back. All right, who's the last person raising their hand? Go ahead.
Okay, I will choose the last one, that's the test the policy before releasing it, because the template is already there, and the US personal information template is already there on the tenant, and it's tailored towards not releasing information that are private to the healthcare. So we have to test the policy to see if it is what we want. If it's not what we want, then we can now customize the policy.
Is it John that spoke now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So in design sessions, this is actually how we'll all be interacting and explain ourselves. And nobody's perspective is wrong. However, turn on the policy right away will not be the best, because remember they say best practice. So best practice is not that any other practice is not right, but what's the best? Turning on the policy right away will not be the best when you have an option to test something. So Madam Fraka, do you understand? So in that context, that's just why your option will not be the most favorable. Because if I have an option to test something, why do I want to turn it? We all know that best practice is test before release. So if we have an option to test something, releasing it before testing is not best practice, even with ITIL. So on that context, your answer is not best fit. Now, the template, we already have a template ready to use that is in line with HIPAC. Now I want to create a custom policy. The question is, my custom policy, what am I changing? So best practice would be test the existing template and see what is matching and see what the gap is relating to it. Then I can now customize it to my environment. Because when you're customizing, you are saying to yourself that you know all the checks and balances, but there's a ready-to-use template already in line with the US personal information policy that I can just test in my organization and see that am I adhering to this policy and what am I not adhering to. Because remember, you will know what you are matching when you test it. The Content Explorer will tell you, and then I can come back to say, okay, this condition, this sensitive information type that was used here is not applicable to me, or it's throwing up so many false positives, or it's not even giving me the exact. I know that we have content here, it's not giving me what I want. So let me customize it to meet my own needs now that I've seen the gap after using the existing template. Does that help us? Everybody who started with test the policy before releasing it. Now, the reason why I feel it was confusing is that it did not just say test. If it said test the policy and put a full stop, I'm sure many people would have taken it. But because it said before releasing it, it almost seemed like it's saying release the policy itself, right? Meanwhile, you want to check and review. So again, English language, right? But ideally, it's best, since there's a ready, it was saying ready to use. So the best thing is test it, and then if you now feel there's a need, you now customize it. And all right, the last question, Miriam, the answer was 1. The answer was 1. All right, the last question, our answers, so that we can use the remaining 25 minutes to enter the other module, even if we don't finish it. One should be swift. Some of these things, they're not cram and pour, right? Even to be honest with you, just looking at this question, I don't remember the answer. Some of these things are template based. So even when you want to do it, you see Microsoft telling you the file types that are applicable in the GUI. So I always tell people, like I said, this is just to check, if you really understand what we're trying to explain here. So there's no, I'm saying don't try and crack your brain. If I were you, I'll Google it. Like, it's not a I must know it. If I don't know it, then I don't know POV. Some of these things are even in the GUI. When you're trying to upload it, to just tell you these are the extensions that are supported and not supported, right? So all 5 types, yeah, exactly. So I'm just saying that there's some of this knowledge check we do. People should not overthink it. Just say it, explain it. They are more of let's brainstorm on how you are thinking about it, because in a real world scenario, you also sit down and deliberate back and forth and then arrive on what's best fit for your environment. All right. So that brings us to the end of implement data protection, and we'll quickly just look at data lifecycle in the next 20 minutes, which is our remaining time. And if we don't finish, we pick that up from next week. All right, so we're looking at how to implement data lifecycle and records management. So we've known our document, we've classified it, we've labeled it, we've protected it, we've seen the different platforms and interactions and storage locations of where our data reside and how we need to protect them across all these environments. Now we need to understand data protection from a life cycle and a records management perspective, because if I keep data beyond when it needs to be kept, or if I am not aware of how long I need to keep data, then there are certain policies and protections that I put in place that might impact the protection of this data. Again, when you look at data protection, we have the data protection laws that we need to adhere to and the data protection governance frameworks that we need to adhere to. So while I'm protecting this data, ensuring it, there are regulatory requirements as to how I keep data and how I manage this data life cycle. So Purview also gives us the ability to be able to adhere to this compliance, because when the compliance people come, you need to show them how you're adhering. Now look at all the locations that you've identified you're keeping data. You can because of your labeling and classification, you can call out that, oh yes, I am processing this kind of data. But then can you now confirm back to the regulators that what they say you should do, if you are processing this kind of data, you are doing it? And that's where Purview data lifecycle comes and helps us. So the principles of retention is that retention wins over deletion, and then the longest retention period wins. Explicit inclusion, like this is just explaining how you would manage your retention life cycle in your organization. So you need to have a retention strategy. You can't just say, oh, I am keeping data, I am generating data, I am processing data, and I am keeping the data. It doesn't work. Even if you don't have a regulatory compliance that you need to adhere to, you need to have a data lifecycle management program that speaks to your retention strategy. If not, you're going to get to a time where you have so much. I'm sure some of you see organizations now that have generated so much paper-based documentation that even when they want to find information, they are struggling. And that's because they don't have a retention data lifecycle management program that speaks to a retention strategy. So they've generated so much data that when they need to make references, they don't even know. So one goal you want to do is, yes, you want to adhere to laws. You also want to adhere to internal compliance policies, and you want to adhere to business regulations, right? And so know your data for the organization. What kind of data is your organization processing? And then what kind of requirements does your organization have to fulfill with this data that they are generating? And based on that, you can now create a retention plan. So remember, we've talked about in the week one, always flashback, everything is working together on the different datas. And so in categorizing these datas, we can see some unique categorization as personal data, sensitive personal data, product, authentication data, log files. You will need to categorize your data. So before using Purview, there are lots of design work that you need to do, and that's where the classifiers was going to help for an organization that is saying, okay, I process so many data I don't know, and then they turn on classifiers that help them to get visibility into the kind of data that they are using. And so in retention strategy, that reporting that you got when you pushed out classifiers, what am I calling classifiers, to help you scan your environment, it also helps you with your retention strategy, where you can see that, okay, this is what I process, this is where I process it, and by regulation, this kind of data says that I should not keep data beyond XYZ. This kind of data says that as soon as I'm done with what I need to do with this data, I should confirm to the person that I have purged the data. It helps you to be able to now define what you need to do once you have categorized your data. So there's a difference between the policy itself and the label. So just the same way when we're classifying data, just the same way when we're trying to protect data, we classified the data, then we created the labels. So we now said, this is a sensitive data, we're going to now give it maybe a highly confidential label. It's the same way in retention, we do the same thing. Once you have classified the data that you use, you also can create what we call retention labels. So while you have data classification labels, you can have retention labels. You can have labels that say staff medical records retention label. So if the regulatory requirement says I shouldn't keep it after a staff has exited, you should purge everything, you can have a label that says staff medical records retention label. And so what that does for you is that, and the condition will be after exit, or whatever condition you put there, so that when you're creating the policy is matching that label. Is the policy that will go and say, okay, if this label, then action this. So key distincts to understand during the life cycle is that retention labels travel with the document, because you're saying that anywhere this document is, this is what action should the document, right? But retention policies don't travel. Retention policies trigger an action, and then the retention label is what it uses to identify that it needs to action that policy. Just for context. Retention labels also count from when the document has gotten that retention label. So if you say something for 30 days, it starts to count the moment that policy has been applied, and then it takes that that count into effect. So for instance, if you have a document called invoice, right, and you've labeled that that document to be 6 years. So, sorry, you have a document called invoice. Your label policy will say that if it's 6 years plus, then delete. So you've labeled that document whatever, but then the policy you are pushing to that label is saying if it's 6 years plus, delete. Now, if the document was last modified May 1st, 2020, it means that the action, that delete, only take effect 6 years on top of that last modification. So even if this document was created in 2019 and the document got modified in 2020, and it was in 2020 that the label was actioned, but the document has been in the system since 2019, it will take into cognizance when the document was last modified and had that label impacted in it, and then action the 6 years delete. Did we get that? Yes, or Saze?
So assume it was actioned in 2020, and in 2025 you edit or make some changes, it's still going to start counting from 2025. Is that what you mean?
No. If in 2020 when you created it, you've already pushed a retention label to it, right? So it has a retention label that says that you should delete after 6 years. Now by 2025, that's 5 years, right? It's not just 6 years. Then you now modify the document, so that document becomes updated as at 2025. When we get to 2026, it's not going to delete the document. It's going to start counting because the updated version is 2025, so it tops up another 6 years.
What if the compliance or regulation says it must be deleted within 6 years?
So that's where we begin to now look at what are the conditions. So when people modify the documents, are they modifying and creating versions? So are we having version controls? So that's where we now begin to understand what's our retention strategy. Okay, we generate this data, but we find out that before the duration, people modify the data. However, so can we get it that when they modify, it will not save, then it will force them to save it as a new copy, so that it's the previous is within the 6 years duration and the new one starts to count. Are you getting it?
Yes, but I'm just thinking if you're still generating a new one, it's more like you only deleted a copy, the old copy, and you still have that same data that you were ought to be deleting in 6 years.
So we're just using one document as the example. So that's why we need to be careful. So it's for the simplest way to explain it. What we're trying to explain here is that when you're creating your strategy, you need to pay attention to that. If you have a document or a data, let's not use document. Now, if you have a data that needs to adhere to a particular compliance regulation and that data is still inactive, you need to pay attention to how you allow for changes, because it also influences how the action of deletion falls into. So that's it. So we're using documents in this instance. In my head, I'm saying if a document needs to be purged after 6 years, what kind of changes are we doing within 6 years of use of the document, so that we know what is allowed for the deletion action to take effect? Sorry, I see some of these hands up.
Yes, my hand is up. Can I go ahead?
Yes, please.
So my question is almost a build up from it. So peradventure the modification that was made on the document was just made maybe on the content, but I didn't touch the retention rule. Will it still be deleted even if I made this modification? Maybe it was made in 2020 and then I edited in 2025. Will it still be deleted in 2026 as usual, since I didn't make any like modification to the retention label, just the content? Then a scenario where, okay, it's 2025 and then I went there, or it's 2024 and then I changed the retention label to 3 years now, or 7 years, like will it automatically overrule the initial one I created and then start from that date with a new retention label? So these are just the two scenarios I want to ask about.
The second one, if you go and modify a retention policy and reapply it to a content, your question is that what retention policy does it adhere to? Is it the new one? The answer is yes. The second one, the first question is where we're still deliberating with ourselves, where we're trying to understand that if I modify a data and the retention policy has not reached, why would, when the retention policy reaches, it doesn't delete off that data because I have modified it? Then how do I adhere to the compliance? That's Osaze's question. I think that's the same thing with your first question. I would honorably say, let me take it out and rethink it again. But just looking at the explanation at which we're working with, it would see the data as a newly created data, and so action it with its retention policy, which is 6 years of this. What I hear is the data has stayed with us more than 6 years because it was created before it was modified. And if compliance says that data should be within 6 years, the expectation is that it should have been deleted, but the explanation on the screen is saying it's not going to be deleted. So the question I hear is, what's the implication when I have to adhere to a compliance that says because I have this data within 6 years, I should delete it? And I would like to come back to us with a response next week if that's okay. Thank you. All right, so you can configure manual retention label policies. Again, retention policies is just like the same data label classification policies that you did, but the only difference with this one is that you're speaking to how data is kept and how long it is kept. Again, you can point retention policies to locations. One should also be very careful in doing this, because retention policies with actions delete means delete, right? And they're not recoverable. However, there are some locations that do not support retention policies, even though those locations might have classifications, but they also do not support retention policies. Retention labels, sorry, not policies, labels. So I don't know if some of you have seen in some organizations, they will have retention policies that says that chats should not, personal one-on-one chats do not stay after like 6 months, 3 months, while chats that probably are in Teams channels, or you find them stay longer in the organization, but things around one-on-one chats, find them purged after XYZ period. We also have the ability to apply auto labels and retention labels to locations, just the same way. Again, there's not too much distinction between how you apply data labels to policies, to DLP policies from retention. They are all using the same logic, and so once you find your keywords, you can use it to configure the right retention label and policies that you want. I will take a break here and just introduce this and have us start back next week on this particular topic. I'll leave the floor open for questions. The class is very quiet today. You see why I wanted to know our mood. For some reason, I just felt like people were in some interesting headspace, maybe because of the strike that happened, pressure, and it's actually rubbing off on the class and rubbing off on me. Everybody is not as happy and interactive and bubbling as they were in the first two classes. So that will bring me to asking Osaze's question, which is, are we really getting value from this class as we expected?
No, madam. So as we were answering the other questions, that's the HIPAA and then those things, my network went off. So I was wondering what the answers were to question 2 and 3.
We're done with the class, but let me just be nice to you. So for 2, we explained that it is test before custom, and the logic behind that for us was you already have something that is already adhering to the health sector. So while custom, what you are not even sure what the gaps are. So test what you have, and if you see any gaps, then you customize it to your environment. Because if you go to custom, what are you creating? You are going to be creating in line with HIPAA one by one. Meanwhile, you already have something that's already been pre-created that you can just use to test. And then if it matches your environment, matches the conditions you want, you can customize it or you can duplicate it and apply it. So it was test, yes. And then the last one was all file types.
Okay, thank you, madam.
You're welcome, sir. All right, I'll be stopping the recording now. And then we can go to Q&A.